All right, everyone, so it's time to start. Welcome to session 2 of the MADWeb workshop. It's a session on network meets the web. And please welcome our first speaker, Scott, who's presenting their work on NinjaDoH.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Scott Seidenberger. I have the privilege of presenting NinjaDoH, a censorship-resistant moving target DNS over HTTPS protocol. I accomplished this work with my colleagues at the University of Oklahoma and at the University of Texas at San Antonio. The one-sentence thesis is this, that we make DOH harder to censor by turning DOH server discovery into a moving target problem, using a Hyperscalers IP address pool for rapid IP rotation, and using a decentralized control plane via IPFS so that clients can keep finding the current endpoint to find their DNS resolver. In this talk, I'm going to motivate the problem, state the censor constraints, walk through the protocol and the system design, and then show the evaluation results that we have for latency, it's list-based blocking, and machine learning-based detection evasion, and we even evaluate this against an adaptive adversary. The QR code there is for the website, artifacts, paper link, and more. If you want to do that now, it'll also be at the end. So DNS censorship resistance has a problem. We thought that we could solve it by just encrypting everything, but while encryption hides content, it does not hide patterns. And censorship systems are increasingly exploiting these patterns. So if you look at encrypted DNS protocols such as DOT and DOQ, they're easy to block because they're on distinctive ports, 853 TCP and 853 UDP. DOH solves this problem by moving DNS into HTTPS on port 443, which is much harder to block without breaking the web. But that blending into HTTPS is not a free pass. Even if the payload's encrypted, a sensor can still use static indicators like a list of known resolver IPs and dynamic indicators like handshake metadata or traffic features. You can use flow duration, packet timing, and so on to fingerprint DOH traffic and block it. So the question for us was this: how do you keep DOH usable in censored networks, even when the sensor stops relying on plain text DNS and starts relying on discovery and fingerprinting of that traffic? So here's what we see in practice, is that the sensors strike back with two big families of blocking techniques. The first set of approaches are list-based. These are the most common and most widely deployed. So these are block lists of known DOH provider IPs and domains, and those lists can either be curated manually. There's even public repositories that just list out all of the DOH resolver addresses, so you could just import them into your enterprise firewall and you've solved that problem. The second are the learning-based approaches, so classifiers that try to detect DOH traffic from the encrypted flow features themselves. So prior work shows very high F1s when the DOH looks standard, which means that they're relying on DOH as camouflage. It's going to protect the contents of the query, but it won't stop you from getting that query blocked by inspection. So NinjaDoH is designed to raise the cost of both. It aims to make that list maintenance ineffective by rotating server IPs, and it will make ML detection either inaccurate or too operationally brittle to be realistic for to be used at scale and in real time. So our design hangs on a specific censorship model, so I'm going to be explicit about that up front. We assume a couple things about the sensor. First off, that the sensor is not going to just block an entire hyperscaler writ large. So the sensor is not going to just block all of AWS's IP address pool or all of Google Cloud. That would cause cascading economic harm to the sensor and a harm to the users. Second, we assume the sensor has no endpoint control, so that the sensor is not going to force a TLS interception or require locally installed inspection routes on the endpoint itself. And that the users can install things on their own endpoints. And then finally, we assume that this hyperscaler that we're using for their address pool is going to be neutral, that they're not going to collude with the sensor to identify specific instances of NinjaDoH being run. If this was the case, then a lot of moving target defenses would fail and would be just a different problem to solve entirely. So what's the core philosophy behind this system design? And the core philosophy is a family of circumvention techniques called moving target defenses. Traditionally, static defenses are designed around hardening a fixed asset. Moving target defenses change these so for a moving target system, you change certain characteristics of the system very frequently so that targeting them becomes difficult or very expensive. And we want to break the adversary's kill chain at step 1, which is that identification and tracking part of the kill chain, the left-hand side. So for NinjaDoH, that characteristic that is moving, the thing that we keep changing, is the server's public IP address. And we do that in a way that keeps service continuous. The goal is not to be undetectable forever, but undetectable just long enough for us to rotate the IP address out and repeat the process over and over again. So we make the enumeration of our service very, very difficult. And next, I'm going to show the architecture, which is a rotating data plane and then a decentralized control plane so that authorized clients know where that moving target is in time and space. So on the data plane, the client sends DOH queries over HTTPS to the server on 443. That server is running a reverse proxy and a recursive DNS resolver that's uncensored, so that once the client hits the server operates as normal. On the control plane, the server periodically allocates this new public IP address from the hyperscaler pool and publishes the new current endpoint to IPFS, which is our decentralized network that we're using for the control plane. This allows the client to resolve what is the current latest IP address that I need to use in order to reach the NinjaDoH server instance. And then the client updates their local DNS proxy configuration. Accordingly, the process repeats. The crucial idea here is that the name the client uses to find the updates is resolved through IPNS, decentralized naming service. The content's on IPFS, and that's the record that's updated. But the network locator, so the actual public IP address, is the thing that's changing very frequently, which makes it, from the censor's perspective, very difficult to pin down where this server is and what needs to get blocked. So internally, we called it a secret signal. You can think about it as a decentralized dead drop, where the server is publishing this small JSON object to IPFS containing 3 main things, which is the timestamp of when that was posted, the current IP address to reach NinjaDoH at, and the DOH query path. Then updates the IPNS record to point to the current content identifier. So the client needs just one shared secret to start, which is that IPNS name hash. It needs to be able to locate the control plane on IPFS. That shared secret can be shared through any number of ways, either through steganographic techniques or another unblocked encrypted messaging service, whatever works for the specific censored network and specific deployment instance that you're in. And then after that, the client can just keep polling the decentralized network and learn the updates, learn the new IP address, and do all of this without DNS at all. And this matters because list-based sensors often focus on domains, and they know the resolver names and common resolver locations. But here, discovery is not happening through DNS. It's happening through that IPNS resolution and IPFS-based content addressing. So the rotating the server IP is only useful if it doesn't break the user experience. So we employ a ladder mechanism to make sure that there's no downtime from the user's perspective. So at any given time, the NinjaDoH instance is running with greater than 2 to n number of public IPv4 addresses it's reachable on. And we're able to use this through cloud native features like elastic network interfaces that allow us to assign an arbitrary number of network interfaces to our server. So it's not a load balancer, and it's not multiple servers behind a single domain front end. It's the same server, just with multiple network interfaces, and those network interfaces get IP addresses rotated through. And so at each rotation interval, the server will assign that newest IP address and start rotating out from the older ones, and this process just continues. Because of this frequent IP rotation, you run into some interesting problems that you have to solve. One of them is certificates. We solve this, or public certificate authorities are too slow to redo this issuance. So we use the end user installs a root certificate that's private that allows us to cut new certificates very quickly. And the second is active probing and path fingerprinting. So many DOH deployments will use just the classic RFC example, which is /DNS-query, and that becomes trivial to actively probe against. So our NinjaDoH protocol uses query path randomization. For our prototype, we just set that to be the IPNS hash, but for future deployments, you could set that to any random string or use a different rotation protocol if you wanted to even be more secure. And for handshakes, the authorized client trusts that private CA, and the service is only reachable via that non-standard path, so active probing becomes very difficult for the censor. So all of this means that we can evade lists. The kind of list we can't evade is an IP whitelist. So this only works against IP blacklists. Solving an IP whitelist problem is out of scope and would be just a different problem entirely. So we're able to avoid lists. How's the performance? So our comparisons are, what would it be just to use DOH normally on like a Cloudflare or Google Resolver? That's about 7 to 8 milliseconds. Our service adds about 4 to 5 milliseconds of delay because we have an extra proxy involved. But that's still for like practical user use cases, something that is would not be not felt by the user. The only other baseline we tested against, which is the most comparable, would be DOH over Tor. So why don't I just put this over Tor? And so we tested it against Cloudflare's DOH over Tor onion service. But as you can see, that becomes quickly unusable. NinjaDoH sits in that sweet spot of having censorship resistance for DNS that preserves standard DOH latency and doesn't inherit the heavy latency incurred by just running a fully encrypted private overlay tunnel. Very quickly, you might ask the question about an adaptive adversary. So what if the adversary can just train against what a NinjaDoH setup looks like? When we do that, the best case model we can get has an F1 of about 0.57, precision 0.76. So basically what this means is that even if the sensor had perfect information of your NinjaDoH deployment, they're not going to be able to, their action window to block you is so short that you could just rotate to the next IP and have your request satisfied by just rotating to the next IP. So implementing even an ML-based classifier against NinjaDoH imposes significant operational real-time cost to a sensor. Finally, democratizing access. So what does it cost to run something like this? We tried to keep it an incredibly small footprint so we could get it on AWS at less than $25 a month. And we also built a client-side TUI that you can just use. So we tried to keep the entire footprint really small and operationally relevant for a user. And also this bootstraps other censorship tools. So there's some recent literature in this field on other censorship circumvention techniques that have a bootstrapping problem. And one of our motivations for NinjaDoH is to help them solve this bootstrapping problem. So we can bootstrap DNS inside a censored network to then enable more fully encrypted, deeper overlay tunnels to prevent censorship. So be a ninja, be agile, decentralized, and resilient with how you're designing censorship-resistant features of the future. Please go to that QR code if you want any more of our information. Posted to GitHub, paper slides, all the good stuff. So I appreciate your time, and I'll field any questions that you might have. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Scott, for a great presentation. If the audience has any questions, please approach the mic.
Yeah, Samuel Giroux, MIT Lincoln Laboratory. So moving target is really great and effective when the thing you're moving, you don't have to share with everybody everywhere. It becomes a lot harder to keep the adversary out when you do have to share everywhere with everyone. So the question becomes, how do you prevent the censor from just joining your network and using the information to know what IP address to block? Certainly that's hard at China scale. It's a lot easier at enterprise or other scale.
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely correct. And I think it's one of those trade-off problems that we wish we had a silver bullet for. So we don't necessarily solve the scaling problem. We say as long as you are as secure as you can keep your shared secret, that bootstrap secret secure. So however large you can keep that bootstrap secret secure, we're fairly confident you can keep the system secure. But the moment that an adversary would learn about how to bootstrap into your instance, then absolutely they can just join, follow, block, etc.
So your threat model has each
small group.
Censorship resilient organization running their own one of these and sharing the links on Telegram.
That's correct. Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
We still have time for more questions. All right. Well, then a final round of applause for Scott.
Thank you.
And I would request the second speaker to come to the stage. All right, this is Hennig presenting their work on from matrix to metrics.
Perfect, it's working. So, hello everyone, my name is Anne, and I'm very happy to be here today to present our paper from matrix to matrix, introducing and applying a configuration matrix to evaluate DMARC policies. I'm here as the third author, so the other ones are not here, Tobias and Fabian, which did most of the work, but I got the ticket to San Diego, so you have to have me here today. But I hope I can answer most of the questions. They prepared me very well, so let's see. First of all, to get everyone on the same page, some motivation for the topic and the technical background. As you might know, email is still a highly utilized communication medium, but it comes with some disadvantages. So it's often targeted by phishing attacks, specifically in the business context, of course. Phishing attacks are even more convincing when they are conducted as spoofing attacks, where the sender is, looks like a known entity, is spoofed so that the sender might look familiar to the user. Unfortunately, the SMTP protocol, which is used to transfer emails from the servers, from one server to another, has no security features in place to prevent email spoofing. And moreover, it does not really care about the headers of the email, so of the message. It only reads the envelope, so the data that also the user would see. And this brings us to the problem that we are looking at, because because the users, they see the message header, and if the server only reads the envelope, there's like a mismatch, right? To protect against email spoofing, some protocols have been evolved or have been developed in recent times, or in the have been developed already some time ago. So we have the sender policy framework, SPF and the domain keys identified mail, DKIM. They allow receiving email servers to perform some checks, specifically on the email header, but they also only provide limited protection. Because for example, they have no rules on how to handle failed email checks. So if an SPF check fails, the server would not know how to handle the incoming email. This is why DMARC was introduced, so the domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance protocol. This checks the alignment of messages from the this checks the alignment of the envelope and the message header, and also checks for SPF and DKIM to know how to handle the email that fails the checks. So it defines how to handle the results, and furthermore, with the reporting functions, the domain owner can receive reports about failed checks, and then can, for example, act on a phishing campaign that's probably incoming. This sounds very great, but it leaves us with the questions how to configure DMARC correctly to benefit the most of it, to make it most effective. So we looked at the RFC, so the DMARC RFC, and while the RFC specifies 10 tags in total, we focused on the ones that are most relevant. And specifically, we looked at tags that help us to protect the recipient and help us to protect the domain owner as best as possible. For the protection of the recipient, we can use the policy and the subdomain policy tag. Both tags can be set either to none, to quarantine, or to reject. And specifically, it is told what should happen with the message. So if it's set to none, no action should be taken, there's no protection, the email will just proceed to the inbox of the user. If it's quarantine, it depends on the server how to handle this. Usually, the RFC says it should be labeled as spam. So the recipient has some protection. And if it's set to reject, then the email would be rejected. So this provides the most protection for the recipient. For the domain, then we have the percentage tag. This basically says how many emails will be handled according to the policy. So if we have a quarantine policy and a PCT tag, for example, set to 50%, then 50% of the emails will be handled as quarantine, and the other one, the remaining 50% will be handled as they had no policy in place, or with the next lower policy, which for quarantine is none. Then we have the specifications that help the domain owner. These are the RUA and RUF tags. And they specify that reports are sent and to whom reports are sent. They do not prevent phishing attacks. They just help to detect and combat phishing attacks at an early stage. Previous work mostly focused on single aspects, so single tags, for example, only the policy tag or the policy and the reporting tags. And the effectiveness of the percentage tag was not described yet. So for us, it was important to look at all the parameters to evaluate the effectiveness of the DMARC configuration, specifically also for the user or for the recipient. So we created this configuration matrix. As I said, it's based on the RFC. It's a simplified version, so if you look at the paper, you will have more explanation on that. On the left, you see the protection for the recipient. So as I said, we have the policies either set to none. For all emails, we have the policies set to none for some emails. So if the percentage tag has some value, then we have the policy quarantine and we have the policy reject. For the domain owner, we have the reporting enabled and reporting not enabled categories. And this made up for, in total, 8 categories that we defined. You can see the reporting functions adds greater benefit for the domain owner, and the policy, the stricter the policy is, it adds the most value for the recipient. For our paper, we would recommend to have 4B as a target configuration, so having the policy set to reject and enabling reporting. This would provide the most benefit for both the domain owner and the recipient. But we also defined 1B as an initial configuration because you can check, you have the reporting effective, so you would know about an incoming phishing attack, but the emails would not be rejected automatically by the server. So you can test what policy is most important, what policy fits most for your server. As a next step, we applied our configuration metrics to a sample of 100,000 pay level domains from the Trenco list. We sampled the domains in January 2025 and obtained data from April 1st, 2025 on. Around 2% of our sample did not provide any data, so this was mostly due to DNS errors, where we did not get any information on the configuration. We had around 42% with no DMARC record, and 44% with DMARC policy in effect. So this leaves us with 56% with DMARC record, and from those 56%, 99% were valid. So we had to look at our configurations, which we defined in the metrics. We saw that around 24% already had implemented the target configuration, which we recommended, so 4B. We had 36% who had the 1B, so the configuration which we defined as initial configuration, as it provides some information for the domain owner, but not really a protection for the recipient. We had 17% using quarantine and reporting, so 3B, and 15% who just implemented DMARC with a none policy and no reporting enabled, so 1A. And this is probably due to fulfill the requirements that were set by Google, Yahoo, and Microsoft in 2025. So they required at least having a DMARC record in place. Okay, what do we see over time? So if we also measured the adoption over a period from April to December, we saw a slight increase in the DMARC adoption, which is, I think, a good news. We see, for example, so the red line, we see that no DMARC decreases, which I think is self-explaining. We were especially interested that, it was very good for us to see that we have the target configuration that we propose also increasing over time, and we also see that non-target, so in general, it increased. And DMARC adoption is still increasing over time. Okay. Next, we had a deeper look into where do domains come from, what configurations do they start with, what do they end with, and how does this change over time. For this, we analyzed the first and the last scan on a daily basis. And we saw that transitions from no DMARC mostly come from 1A, mostly go to 1A and 1B, so like kind of the initial configurations, first to fulfill the requirements that I said before, and 1B to fulfill the requirements, but also have some protection. Those are then followed by 3B and 4B most often. So 4B was, in many cases, the kind of end configuration. The transitions to the target configuration, so 4B, mostly come from 1B, which also shows that most of the domain owners followed not our recommendations, but what we assumed would be a good transition. Already, domain owners already followed this. So they came from 1B, they had the DMARC set to none, but have reporting in place, and then they went until 4B to have the policy set to reject and have reporting as well. The next most often transition, the next often transition that we recorded was 3B and then 4B, and then or no DMARC, and then they directly went to 4B. So yeah, and then last we looked at where do people arrive that have 3B, because we saw 3B, as you might remember, has a share of about 17%. So where do they come from? And again, most people had 1B before they transferred to 3B, and also no DMARC and then 3B. So the transition which we found most common was that they first had no DMARC, then they implemented the 1B, so reporting and a policy set to none. Then they had 3B, policy set to quarantine and reporting, and then 4B, policy set to reject and reporting enabled. Yeah, for most of the domains, we saw that they remained in the same category based on the daily scans. So around 90%, around 90% remained in the category over time, and only 7% had one change, 2% around had two changes, and less than 1% had more than one changes in the time that we looked at, so within a year. So to summarize, we developed a DMARC configuration matrix to better classify the effectiveness of DMARC configurations. We provided recommendations. We set an initial state of 1B and a target configuration of 4B is best for the domain owners. We applied the configuration matrix to the Tranco top 100,000 domains, and we found that around 13% match our target configuration. And we also see that there's an increase over the 8 months, so over our observation period. The analysis of the transitions based on a monthly and a daily basis showed that the initial configuration for domain owners is often 1A or 1B, so policy set to none, but reporting enabled or not enabled, and then they transition to either 3B or 4B directly. Future work, I think as most papers, we also had identified quite some future work. So we find it interesting to extend our analysis to other samples, and specifically to country or industry-specific samples to see if the transitions or if the implementation differs between different countries or between different sectors. Further investigating reasons for weak or misconfigured domains, for example, through user studies. So why do domain owners choose for a weaker configuration? The investigation of the transition times would be interesting. So how long does it take domain owners to change from one configuration to another? And also the development of information campaigns to raise awareness and give clear recommendations for the domain owners what they should do and why this benefits them the most. You see we have our data available, so the code is available, the data of the study are available, and if you want to connect with us, you have also the contact details, and you can also read the paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. If you have any questions, please approach the mic. Since there are no questions, feel free to reach the other.
So if there are further questions, feel free to contact one of us.
Right. Thank you. Final applause. Right, let's welcome the next speaker.
I didn't really have time to test. So. No, it doesn't matter.
Okay, so this is Janos Surdi from Palo Alto Networks. Welcome.
This way. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Janos, and this is a work together with my amazing, wonderful co-authors, Ritika, Ram, and Daiping. And today I will talk about TLD reputation. But first, why am I talking about TLD reputation? Why we find it important? So I've been working in the space for about 15 years, and over the time, what I found is that research in academia and industry and detection capabilities increased a lot. It became, we have much more detectors, much better quality detectors. It's awesome. At the same time, these great detectors don't stop and make malicious domain registrations less profitable for cyber criminals. And we also, in parallel, see that actually malicious domain registration practices over this period became worse, much, much worse over time, even though we are detecting them much better. And especially in the previous few years, we have seen like a huge jump. Now, for single campaigns, these are distinct campaigns, malicious actor register hundreds of thousands of domain names, right? So why is that? And how come if our detectors are so much better? Like it's night and day, right? This is why we study TLD reputation. So just to give you a bit of background on the domain registration ecosystem, users who register domain names are called registrants, and they have to go to resellers or registrars. Registrars are accredited resellers, accredited by ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, who oversee domain names, especially for generic TLDs. And these TLDs are operated by registries, for example, VeriSignOperates.com, .edu, .cc. And some of them, in green, are generic TLDs. This is on high level, the two main types. And the orange ones are country code TLDs. And generic TLDs are managed, and their policies are created by ICANN. But for country code TLDs, this is done by countries. For .hu, Hungary would decide for how much, who can register these domains and how. Also about ICANN, this will be very important a bit later. It's a multi-stakeholder model. It's a very complex set of people from all parts of the internet community, from end users to registries, registrars, all kinds of companies, businesses, and their incentives often not align to actually implement policies that will meaningfully stop malicious domain registrations. And I will come back to this at the end of the talk. So just a very brief history of TLDs. Originally, they planned only a few TLDs, less than 10. It includes TLDs like .com or .org. And I'm specifically will talk about generic TLDs, just to clarify here, that were introduced to the public in the next couple of years. In 2000, a few more were added, .biz TLD, .net, 2004, again a few more. But altogether, it was not more than a few dozen generic TLDs. But in 2012, ICANN initiated a new program, and now anyone who is willing to pay enough money and put together a good enough program could have their own top-level domain. And now we have over 1,000 of generic top-level domains, which might contribute to the fact that we see so much malicious domain names. And another factor we find it very important to talk about this now is because in 2026, they will add a new round of TLDs, potentially, again, hundreds or thousands of more generic TLDs, where previous research and so far every evidence shows that it doesn't help the internet community at large. There's not much benign use in most of the cases, but it enables a lot of malicious activities. We call legacy TLDs everything, the few dozen TLDs actually, before 2012, and everything after, with these new programs, new GTLDs. And you can see on this plot, the y-axis is the cumulative number of TLDs and non-restricted TLDs, so that are publicly available. And at the elbow of the plot, where the registration was the fastest, the first kind of like wave, we call the first wave, it's like a sub-generation of new TLDs. And then by the end of second wave TLDs, the vast majority of these new GTLDs were available to the public. And the third TLDs is the final last one that we introduced. So we wanted to understand, do we see a difference across these sub-generations of new TLDs? Another is that the landscape really changed since the last systematic study in 2018, where we saw that their reputation is not as good. But the picture was not as worrying and bad as it's right now, especially given the time that has passed since. To study TLD reputation, we use Palo Alto Network's domain categorizations. We split domains in a TLD into 3 categories: malicious, which includes, oops, I didn't want to click there yet, like malware, phishing, command and control domains; benign, like business domains, games, dating domains, and so on. And we have 60+ categories, and this is some domains where we have been identify a benign use, a benign content on the domain. And the last one is we call a low content category. It includes parked domains with insufficient content, like an empty page, or some domains which we call unknown that just gave us some errors. This last category doesn't mean they are malicious, right? But on a macro scale, if in a TLD you see that a lot of these domains have a low content, that signals to us that it has not been adopted to benign use, especially if it's comparatively very significant. We studied 3 metrics. We use 3 metrics. First is malicious ratio. This is what all previous work studying malicious activity and TLDs mainly focused on. This is like malicious count divided by the total count. And previous work before really focused mostly either on malicious or benign use. But we kind of wanted to study also the two together at the same time with the data available to us. So here we studied the malicious to benign ratio, which tells us if how well TLD is adopted for benign use, while it's also used for a lot of malicious use, or if it's not adopted for benign use, right? And the non-benign ratio is the malicious plus low content divided by the total count. This is another view at whether these TLDs are actually used for benign purposes or not. On this plot, really please don't try to read the numbers, just look at the colors. So light blue is that it signals a good reputation and dark a worse reputation. On the y-axis, you see the generations, legacy, first, second, and third wave TLDs, generic TLDs, and the bottom is CC TLDs. And the columns are just the different metrics. And what you can see from legacy to third wave, they are, and it shows also itself is the average TLD reputation over our 4-year study period. And what you see consistently from generation to generation, their reputation is worse for all metrics. Here we can see a line plot of the same thing, but it's not, not average reputation, right? But for each point in time. On the y-axis, you see the reputation for malicious ratio. The x-axis is the date from 2021 to 2025. And the bottom 2 lines, the flat lines, are for CC TLD and legacy TLDs. And what you can see that new GTLDs have much worse malicious ratio at any point in time, basically, than these 2. And also, the other thing to notice is that this gap widens. It's not that they are getting closer to legacy and CC TLDs, they are actually getting worse. 2 notable points here. You can see a very sharp increase for the third wave TLDs. And this is done because one single campaign at I think the .sbs TLD, where a person registered hundreds of thousands of malicious domains. And because benign use is low, it results in a sharp increase. And also, it's weird, like, is second wave TLD getting better? Why is it flat at the end? And the reason is actually if you remove the dot bond, maybe I mixed up these two, but if you remove one of the TLDs, then it would still be an increase. But for one TLD, where one actor had a lot of, again, hundreds of thousands of malicious domains, didn't continue registering a few 100,000, or it just did less. So one TLD affected this flat line by itself. But if you remove this TLD, it would still increase. Similar thing for malicious to benign ratio, but this difference is even higher because new GTLDs are not used that often for benign purposes. And these are just some example, uniform random examples of all malicious domains registered in .sbs and .bond TLD. And you can see they are all these automatically generated domain names, but they are not DJs, normal DJs. Normal DJs, you create hundreds of thousands, millions of domains, and you register a few. But the new trend is, because of the new GTLDs and their domain registration policies, is now people can register them, and they actually they register hundreds of thousands of domains. And it seems profitable because they do it across the board. Finally, for the non-benign ratio, the difference is less, the difference is still pretty big, but the opening of the gap is not that clear, but actually looking at it's pretty clear, right? So it's just getting much worse. So one contribution to this becomes pretty obvious if you look at this table. This is the weighted average price for a generation. And what you can see here is that CC TLDs and legacy TLDs are much more expensive than new GTLD domains. While first, second, and third wave are much cheaper, third wave TLDs being the cheapest of all. And this is one of the most fundamental things in domain registration, is the price. If you want to register hundreds of thousands of malicious domains, it's a big difference if it costs you $1 versus $10. I'm not going to talk much about this table because I'm not sure if I have time about it, but these are some sponsoring organizations for new GT TLDs. And what you can see, for some of them, they have more malicious domain registered than benign, up to 2 to 5 times more, especially .sin. And I will show you in the next slide, and they also have a very cheap price. But especially, I would like to show you, some random samples from .sin. And this is actually from an SMS phishing campaign, a smishing campaign, where they just generate a bunch of domains that on your SMS message might look like a .com domain for very cheap. So we talked about that ICANN is responsible for figuring out basically registration policies for generic TLDs. And they have a DNS abuse mitigation program that consists of 3 parts. They have ICANN Domain Metrica, which based on their data studies malicious use of TLDs. They fund some research like Informal and have some public forum like SIFT where people can talk about this issue. But the potentially most impactful thing they do is enforcing contractual obligations for registrars and registries. That means they need to take down or suspend domains that they get well evidence information about this domain being used for abuse, right? But it seems like that these policies didn't have really meaningful impact in the past and even right now. Researchers suggested in the past several alternative registration policies that they believe might help more. For example, incentivizing registries and registrars to not allow malicious registrations, limiting bulk registrations, so it make it harder for people to register hundreds of thousands of domains, stricter registrant identity verification, and increased registration pricing. One good example is .cn, which had a registration price originally around 10 to 20 cents, and it had a very lax identity verification process. So they had a lot of malicious domain names under .cn, but they had enough and they changed it. The price went up to $10 US, and they required very strict identity verification, and the vast majority of malicious domain registrations ceased to exist there. And they moved to other TLDs that were cheaper, easier to register. I would like to mention that in light of what we see, that these new GTLDs have sometimes pricing under $1 US, maybe potentially a minimum mandatory registration pricing could help in stopping people from registering malicious domains at massive scales. So in summary, newer GTLD generations have worse reputation. They are used for benign purposes much less often. But the worst part is that all of these reputation deteriorate faster over time. They are not getting more like the good reputation legacy TLDs. They are getting worse. Low pricing is definitely one huge factor enabling this. And looking at the current ICANN policies, it will not help. So we need some new policy intervention, because even though amazing researchers at industry and academia are doing what they can, it doesn't stop the profitability of malicious domain registrations. So again, for example, minimum mandatory registration pricing could be very useful. So thank you for your attention, and if you have more questions after the Q&A, please feel free to email us or contact us on LinkedIn. And yeah.
Thank you, Jonas. Please make a line on the mic.
Yeah, great talk, by the way. So have you also considered, apart from looking at the ratios of domains, might as well look at ratios of threat actors or campaigns to domains? Because let's say, I'll give you a scenario that I'm an emerging business and I have a TLD assigned, like that I'm using a TLD, and my competitor, what they would do is, like, if it's one campaign that with massive number of domains, the TLD will have a bad reputation and it will impact my business when I have a bad reputation with it, right? So how about looking at multiple different campaign ratios to the domains? Have you considered that as well?
I think that's a great idea, and please do a research doing it. I think it's very hard to match it. So we have a few examples when they had mass registration, and we have examples when they have tens of thousands or hundreds of domains. But figuring out for all malicious domains which campaign to attribute them to campaigns and have meaningful results would be very hard. I think it would be very interesting to study it, but it's pretty hard.
Great research, thank you. So if these new GTLDs are mainly being used for malicious purposes, why does ICANN keep reintroducing, allowing people to create new GTLDs? You mentioned another round happening soon. What's going on? Is ICANN trying to make as much money as possible, or what is their motivation?
It's hard to say it like in a very politically correct way, or I don't no, maybe that's not the word, but correct way. Officially, they want to enable like domain use and internet use across the globe, across different regions, across different use cases, and not just limit it to a few actors. Like legacy TLDs are operated just a very few operators. It was like a very closed circle, so they kind of open it up. So this is kind of like a noble goal. At the same time, it's probably a pretty good income source for ICANN, and it could be okay to have new GTLDs if they are much stricter on how they do it, right? Not all new GTLDs are bad also. This is just like a macro picture. There's a lot of GTLDs that are not abused. They have high registration pricing, they have some restrictions. For some other reasons, they might not be abused that much. So I think it's just the policies that would require them to introduce this and not have that many malicious registrations would be not something this multi-stakeholder model would ever agree on.
Thank you.
We still have time. Yeah.
Cool. So I guess still forming my question a little bit, but the idea is that if we did have higher pricing for these new GTLDs, then maybe attackers wouldn't be able to register as many domains. In that case, it might make them harder to find. One way of viewing this problem is, well, if we have cheap GTLDs, then we can more easily identify or quantify that signal, and it's easier to classify or identify these malicious actors. So, yeah, how do you think that economic pricing changes would affect overall security?
I think positively, strictly positively. And the reason is the following. There's always actors who are not very good in their security hygiene and hiding themselves, even for few domains, even for a lot of domains. It's okay we have some wins where we find hundreds of thousands at the same time, but do you know about the hundreds of thousands of domains registered for a campaign which you didn't detect? I don't think so, right? There are actors who are just way better at hiding themselves, and what we detect, we don't know. So I don't think it would affect it at all, actually. And at the same time now, when we detect some of this, let's assume there's no one who can register hundreds of thousands of domains, which I don't believe. I think they can, if someone wants to. Especially, with current tools are getting really good. We still have those actors that we wouldn't have these actors, right? But some actors are just really good. So some malicious registration, it wouldn't help. But we at least wouldn't have to worry about the large amount, and we can focus on the tricky ones more.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, we're out of time. So if you have further questions, please contact the other after the session. And yeah, let's give a final round of applause.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Tino Eger, if I'm not mistaken. Ronald? Oh, then I am mistaken. Let's welcome Ronald, our last speaker for this session.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Ronald. My name is a little bit more complicated than the name of my co-author. I'm from TH Nuremberg, and TH Nuremberg is the institution where Georg Simon Ohm was working 200 years ago, and you have all heard of him. You have learned about Ohm's law in the past, yeah, in your physics course, I guess. And I think today it's the time to redefine this law. And we have had an awesome talk before by Anne, and she was talking about SPF, DKIM, DMARC, and so on. And our main question in our research is, what happens if you put more and more security mechanisms into the DNS? Which kind of impact does this have? And our thing here is that we say, okay, security measures increase resistance in the system. And let's just step right into it. This is the picture that companies that use DMARC, that we have heard before, and DMARC providers see today in practice. They see that around 6 to 8% in cases, there occur inexplicable DKIM temp errors. So this is the yellow part here. And no one really has an explanation for these temporary errors. So we talked to 5 different DMARC providers and to different companies, and they all confirmed that this is the case in practice. Yeah? And so it was interesting for us to find out, well, what is the reason for this? Yeah? What's the reason for these DKIM temp errors? I want to say at the beginning that these temp errors are not problematic per se, but they can become a real problem in combination with other aspects, as I will also cover in this talk. So how did we check what the problem is? We introduced the test setup where we used 6 different domains from which we sent emails. We used different DNS providers, namely AWS Route 53 and Cloudflare, and we sent emails to Exchange Online and to Google Mail accounts. We used different DKIM selectors because we wanted to make sure that the time of day does not have an impact on these temp errors. We used different key lengths from 1000 bit to 4000 bit. And in total, over a period of 4 months, we sent 100,000 identical emails just to find out about these DKIM temp errors. And here's the result. What we can see here is that so this is the overview of 1 month. And what we see here is that only emails that are sent to Microsoft Exchange online accounts do have this, do show these DKIM temp errors, and only in the case if the sending organization uses AWS Route 53, which is the DNS server of Amazon, as their DNS server. So this was kind of strange for us, because Cloudflare didn't make any problems. If we send emails to Google, there's no problem there. So somehow the DNS provider and Microsoft, somehow they play a role in the game here. So let's just first look at the DNS provider. And there's one pretty simple detail here, namely AWS Route 53 includes the authority section in their DNS responses, and Cloudflare does not. And what does it mean? Well, it just means that there is a difference in the response size of 140 bytes. Why does it matter? Well, because if a DNS response is more than 512 bytes, then eDNS is necessary, or even a fallback to TCP. So this is one aspect. So let's look at, when we talk about DKIM, and pointed out earlier, then we have to, it's used for signing emails. And in the DKIM record in the DNS, the public key is placed. And we found that if we use a public DKIM RSA key of length 2048 bit, we need 410 bytes of payload. And this payload, this DKIM key, fits into a DNS response from Cloudflare, but not into a DNS response from Amazon. And that's it. That's the reason for the DKIM temp errors, as we have found. So pretty simple thing here. So we have an error rate of 8 to 9% for Amazon, compared to 0.1 to 0.2 for Cloudflare. And as I said, only Microsoft Exchange Online accounts are lead to the problem. So then in the next step, we wanted to investigate why Microsoft has this problem, and we digged a little bit deeper, and then we found that, well, Microsoft does the subdomain delegation for mail protection outlook.com. This is the domain you get as a business when you use Exchange Online as your email provider. And there is one DNS server that is used there, which simply can't speak eDNS. So this was really amazing for us to see that this Microsoft environment has a DNS server which can't cope with eDNS. Because eDNS is standard. I mean, US community, you know it. It's 25 years old, and it's implemented in Windows from Windows Server 2008, and Microsoft has problems there. So this is one interesting finding for us. As I said before, these DKIM temp errors are not automatically problematic, because when we step back a little bit, and when we think of the talk by Anne before, we heard that you have to have DKIM in place, SPF in place, and DMARC. And the problem is, for an organization that implements all the mechanisms, everything is fine. Yeah. DKIM fails because of the reason we just have shown. If SPF is valid, if SPF can be authenticated, everything is fine, the email is delivered. But if SPF fails as well, then the email is not delivered to the recipient. Yeah? So we thought, could there be any problems for SPF as well that depend on the DNS response sizes? And yes, we found a good example, as I think. Namely, we need to make sure to know how SPF works. For SPF, the receiving email server needs to fetch all the TXT records from the sending domain zone. Yeah? All the records, just to check if there is one record which has an SPF entry. And when we think about the earlier thing where we said, okay, DNS response sizes are problematic, could there be a case where DNS response sizes are a problem in terms of SPF? Yes, definitely. Namely, these TXT records are used for all kinds of security measures. So organizations, and I guess most of you have used TXT records as well, namely for domain verification. Yeah? And one example, adobe.com, they have 69 TXT records, where 67 of these TXT records are just used for domain verification, for Google Site Analytics, Facebook, and so on. Yeah? So their DNS zone is totally overcrowded. So think about it. For every receiving email from adobe.com, the receiving email server needs to fetch all these records, which make up to 5 kilobytes. So we need a TCP connection there. And TCP connections are more, the performance is worse. And we expect that due to this worse performance, we also see a potentially higher error rate. To verify this, we stuffed up the DNS zone of one of our sending domain with artificial TXT records just to reproduce the adobe.com case. And what we saw was kind of interesting, because from that month on that we did this, cloaking the zone, the SPF temp error rate doubled. Yeah. So that's the problem. So if you are an organization, you have Amazon as your DNS provider, you send emails to Microsoft Exchange online accounts, and you have too many TXT records in a domain, then it can happen that your emails are not delivered, or at least a certain percentage of these emails. So what can you do about it? Well, first thing, of course, get rid of these unnecessary TXT records. So this is then you can get rid of the SPF problem. Second thing is, if you use Microsoft as your email provider, you can choose to use the newer sending domain MX Microsoft. Yeah, but the process to go there is pretty tedious. So not many companies actually perform this task. So we have been doing measurements of thousands of companies every month for 4 years now, and we saw that only around 1% of these investigated companies, they actually use these mechanisms where DANE and DNSSEC is supported. But this, of course, would help here as well. And, well, that's basically it. So we are the first to actually pinpoint this problem. So when you read about it on the internet, there are a lot of blog articles about it, a lot of LinkedIn posts where people state, okay, we do have this, we see this problem, but we don't know what's the reason for it. Now we have the reason. And I think the solutions are pretty straightforward. Yeah, so that's not really the rocket science to fix them. So yes, I believe that DNS-based security measures are useful. So think of DANE, SPF, DKIM, DMARC, everything is fine, yeah. But as we said, they increase the resistance in the system. And so we should think about taking the pressure off here in the resistance. Thanks for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Right, thank you, Ronald. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Did you tell Microsoft about their broken server?
Yes, we told them, and there it got really weird because so we sent it in as a bug report, but they said, well, no, it's not a bug, but you can contact another place. They gave us some address, because obviously you want to have a feature enabled here, which was kind of strange for us to see. And so the numbers that I showed you were from September to December. In January, we saw that Microsoft acted somehow, yeah. So the numbers went down. We thought, okay, they have been fixing it, but now the actual numbers are going up again. So they have some problems there. And I just yesterday read that a number of companies that want to migrate to the secure domain, to mx.microsoft, they have issues. So it doesn't work anymore. So somehow it's there is some problem there. But as I said, it was just yesterday. We couldn't find out what's going on there. But we keep looking at them.
Right, no more questions? All right, let's thank the speaker then.